Evidently, I should have waited till the afternoon to do my update on Iraq yesterday, because my one that I recorded then was before all the action at the embassy happened. I knew that there were protests going on in Baghdad, and I mentioned that, but they were nothing, I guess, too out of control by the time that that the news was reporting it, very early in the morning. But of course, as probably we all know now, and perhaps if you didn't hear, the protesters who were all affiliated with Kataib Hezbollah, they were waving Hezbollah flags, decided to swarm the U.S. embassy, and they tried to vandalize the walls, and they were smashing windows, and of course there's a big gate, so there was a big wall around it. They weren't smashing windows on the building; they were smashing windows like on the guard gate, and graffitiing and having your flag waving and heckling the Americans behind the walls. And frankly, it looked very similar to me to the lead up to the Iranian hostage crisis, in which the protesters in Iran swarmed around the U.S. embassy and were chanting very loudly and were being quite raucous and to some extent violent. Although in this case, I think the protesters or rioters were much more overtly violent than in the case of Iran in 1979, at least until that final breaking point when they stormed through the gates and took everyone hostage. Although I think it's pretty clear in this case that the U.S. was not going to let that happen in Baghdad, and I think probably the folks who had swarmed around the embassy wanted to give them a scare, but knew that they were not going to capture the building. I think they very clearly were trying to evoke memories of the Iranian hostage crisis, but the U.S. has too many resources in that region these days to where they were able to reinforce it pretty quickly. About 100 Marines showed up in short order, and there were 2 Apache helicopters flying overhead and dropping flares and things, and making their presence known, just to say, hey, you can try and vandalize the outside walls, but you're not going to make it inside. Now, of course, all this was avoidable had the U.S. not very recklessly gone and bombed Kataib Hezbollah, which is one of the member groups of the Popular Mobilization Units, one of the militias that make up that confederation, essentially like the Iraqi National Guard is how you could think of them. 25 of their guys were killed, and the head of the PMU said, "Hey, we're gonna get back at the Americans. We're gonna have to do something to show that this is not okay." And I think that this was a pretty smart thing on their part to do. This whole storming of the embassy thing, because they didn't bring guns or anything. They were clearly not going to take over the embassy. They were not trying to pose themselves as spontaneous protesters. These were very clearly guys from the PMU who were just mad at America, and they wanted to show their dissatisfaction. And I think this was a smart way of doing it. I think that the PMU here were trying to bait the Americans into doing something stupid, like shooting one of them, and then they could very easily hold that guy up as a martyr and say, look, yet another man who's killed for standing up to American aggression. And they could have built some kind of groundswell of grassroots support around that, and created a real popular uprising against the U.S. presence in Iraq, which again is still 5,000 troops at this point. But luckily, the U.S. did not escalate the situation. They did not take the bait. They did not shoot anybody. They did not massacre these guys who were standing there. Again, from what I could see, they did not bring their rifles or anything. They didn't have any RPGs. There were no rocket launchers. They were just waving flags and being generally kind of merry and wishing they said, oh, well, we came to wish the Americans a happy new year. Isn't that fun? So all day, actually, the U.S. media decided to start reporting on this. Now that there's some action going on, and I think that they too like the flashbacks to the Iranian hostage crisis. That was very good for ratings for TV news, and so apparently the news networks were talking about this all day. And of course, they were running with the Iranian aggression narrative, saying how these guys, these rioters outside of the embassy, this is just another example of Iranian aggression. And it was so funny watching the congressmen get up there one at a time and going, oh, I know for a fact that Iran is behind this. And it's like, well, what do you know? You don't know anything yet. You haven't been briefed on anything. And again, it's not like that's a bad guess to say that the PMU, has some affiliation with Iran. Obviously, they do. As I've said many, many times, a lot of people in Iraq are associated with Iran. Namely, people who work in the highest levels of the Iraqi government. There are people who have worked in the highest levels of the Iraqi government who were in exile in Iran when Saddam Hussein was in power. That's how pro-Iran they are, is that they had to leave the country under Saddam Hussein. They sided with Iran in the Iran-Iraq war. They sided against their own, people. Of course, they had their reasons, but being pro-Iran and being affiliated with Iran in Iraq is not an unusual thing. But of course, they love to play this up and act like it's something super special and new and unique, and act like how, oh my God, Iran is interfering on our territory, just to try and pump up the war propaganda. And it's pretty clear that it seems like the congressmen are ready for that. They would be very happy if Trump responded to Iran, militarily after this, even though this was not some military attack. Again, what started all this was that rocket attack, very limited rocket attack on the base near Kirkuk, and there's been no evidence or even logical reasoning presented as to why Kataib Hezbollah would be behind that. Again, they're being accused of attacking their own allies, people who are the Iraqi government, which is allied with Iran, on behalf of Iran. Nothing adds up. And so you can't call, them rioting outside of your embassy because you killed 25 of their people some act of aggression. It's not even proportional. A proportional response, let alone an aggressive response would be, you starting a fight. But so let's say they responded proportionally to what the U.S. did. The U.S. killed 25 of their soldiers. If they went out and killed 25 of U.S. soldiers, not even that would be an act of aggression, because they were responding proportionately to what was done to them. But they didn't even go and do that. They didn't go and kill 25 U.S. soldiers. They didn't do an eye for an eye. On this one. They just went and rioted outside the embassy and heckled them and were waving flags and wishing them a happy new year, shooting fireworks over the walls. And so, watching people go on TV and try to spin this as, oh my God, look at this. Look at Iran is such a threat. It's comical. And it's so funny that they're getting so upset about people rioting outside the embassy. And Trump is saying now to the Iraqi government, oh, you better defend our embassy from your people, because if you don't, it shows that you're not a friend of ours. Well, Iraq didn't defend the Iranian consulate, which another, riot burned down a couple months ago. Does anybody remember that? I think they burned down a couple of Iranian consulates. One in Basra, and then I think there was a second one. And so the Iraqi government didn't defend, the Iranians in that case. Does that mean that they're not a friend to Iran anymore? And of course, I don't remember the U.S. coming out and condemning the rioters who burned down that Iranian consulate. If anything, I'm sure if the CIA was doing their job, which again, I'm not joking here, this is part of their job, is to encourage protests against countries that, the U.S. doesn't like. Yeah, I'm sure the CIA had to be trying to stoke the flames of that protest movement at the time and trying to egg on that anti-Iranian sentiment. So again, I have no sympathy for the U.S. government in this case. I especially have no sympathy for the State Department in particular. I don't like the State Department. They don't do anything. They say, oh, we're the calm diplomats in the room. We're the ones who keep the peace. And no, you guys are provocateurs. You're very good at gaslighting. I think that's more what the State Department does. They act like they're rational people who are just trying to find a peaceful solution to everything when they take the most violent choice in every possible situation. And so, well, anyway, moving on to Trump's response to all this. He's trying to take a victory lap and compare this to Benghazi and say, like, oh, look, we defended our diplomatic outpost this time, and Obama let people die, and he's, whining about Benghazi. And so now they're going to send these 750 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne, which are I believe they have like an 18-hour time period frame in which they can get anywhere in the world. So they're probably almost all in Kuwait now. And then now also the Defense Department is going to be sending 4,000 more troops. So the response to a bunch of people getting up and rioting to protest the presence of 5,000 troops in Iraq because they don't like having U.S. troops in their country is to send 4,000 more troops and think that that will somehow calm the situation. They don't want you around when you have 5,000 troops there. If there are 9,000 troops there, they won't suddenly want you around. People are still going to be angry. They're still not going to want you. You can call them Iranian puppets all you want, but the fact of the matter is that they live in that country. That's their country, and they don't want you around. And frankly, again, as the the protest movement a couple months ago shows, when they burned down an Iranian consulate, of course, different people, not the same people here. Obviously, the folks who are in Hezbollah definitely are okay with Iran. They don't have a problem with Iran being involved in Iraqi politics, but other people in Iraq do. And so it's obvious that there is the people in Iraq are tired, generally, of foreign meddling in their affairs. They're saying, we've had, almost 20 years now of countries being involved in running and trying to run our government from the outside. Let's just, try and handle our own affairs for a little while. And so until, really both sides, the U.S. and Iran, decide to do that, I don't think that the heat will be off of them. I think that there will be folks in Iraq who resent those two countries very deeply for as long as they have a presence there. So I'm interested to see how this situation will deteriorate further. It'll be interesting to see if Trump actually does finally take some direct action against Iran. I hope he doesn't. I don't think he will, frankly. I think that Trump still knows that it's not smart to get into a war with Iran. As we get closer to the election, though, I do think that risk goes up, because if Trump is not doing well before the election, he may want to start a war, see a war as advantageous, since you can whip up patriotic fervor. I've said this in the past, that I think that really when the risk for a war with Iran will come would be this summer. And that depending on what direction the polls are moving, and if it looks like Trump is behind, well then if an opportunity presents itself to start a war with Iran, Trump may very well take it. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.